From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
I was on the train with my friend Vanessa. We were going from Nottingham to go into London for just a night out. And we just listened to music, just having a good time. And then I see that 5 rows ahead of me, a guy in a white T-shirt just jumps out of his seat. And I was thinking, what's happened? And then people started shouting from our coach, oh, he's got a knife.
It was like some unimaginable Halloween horror. An ordinary Saturday, with a train full of people making their way to London, some in costume for Halloween-themed parties, and suddenly, a man wielding a large knife was on the rampage.
Everyone's running. A guy next to me is holding his arm covered in blood, saying he got stabbed.
An attack on a moving train with no way of getting off. People ran from carriage to carriage. Some, with little children, locked themselves into the toilets to hide.
It was horrific. It was really horrific. There's a guy with a knife stabbing everyone, and you don't know if you're going to be next.
I suddenly heard people screaming and shouting, run, run, run. At this point, I see people running past me covered in blood, and that's when I realised this is serious.
What do we now know about how this attack unfolded? Could it have been prevented? And what lessons can we learn, if any, about how to keep passengers safe? The story today: the Huntingdon train attack.
So it was a little after 8 p.m. on Saturday evening. I was still in the newsroom. I was sort of packing my bits up, getting ready to go home, when I had a call from a senior colleague saying there appears to be something going on a train somewhere between Peterborough and London.
That's Izzy Lyons, a reporter at the Sunday Times who was manning the news desk when the first reports came in.
It's always quite hard in those decisions to try and judge how serious this stuff is, but fortunately the Sunday Times was able to make contact with a witness pretty quickly who was able to describe seeing multiple people stabbed, really serious injuries and severe blood loss, and that the attacker was armed with quite a large knife. So we knew straight away that this was really serious.
I mean, what does that look like in the newsroom? Is this an all-hands-to-deck moment?
Yeah, they're fairly intense, stressful situations. Me and my colleagues bashed our heads together and realised we were going to have to do something for the paper the following day. We only had about 45 minutes. We were fast approaching sort of print deadlines, so it was a bit of a scramble. And in the melee, I suppose, the most important thing with incidences like this is making sure everything we publish is completely and utterly accurate. People will remember last summer, following the Southport attacks, what happens when misinformation takes hold. So we take that really, really seriously at the Sunday Times, and just making sure every fact is bottomed out and that we are giving our readers the fullest picture, but also the most accurate one.
Izzy, since then, in the hours and days that have passed, we've learnt a lot more. A man has now been charged in connection with the train attack. What do we know about him, and what has he been charged with?
We know that a man called Anthony Williams has been charged with the train attack. He's a 32-year-old from the Peterborough area. He's been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of actual bodily harm, and 1 count of possession of a bladed article. The police have also told us that he was charged with another offence, and this related to an alleged incident earlier on Saturday. Williams has been charged with an additional count of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article in connection to an incident on London's DLR network at Pontoon Dock Station, which is fairly near London City Airport, about 1:45 in the morning.
So on the Docklands Light Railway rather than on that LNER train from Peterborough?
Yeah, so in a very separate part of the country. But it happened a good, 18 hours before the incident on the LNER train.
What do we know about that incident?
We know very little, apart from the fact that a victim was said to have sustained injuries to the face and that it happened in the early hours of Saturday morning.
And Izzy, obviously, he's been charged. This is all very legally sensitive now. But what happens next in the process?
So Williams made what we called a first appearance today at Peterborough Magistrates Court because he's been charged with what we call indictable offences. So that means they're very serious and they can only be dealt with in the Crown Court. His case will now be pushed up to the Crown Court where he'll make another appearance, I suspect, sometime this week. The case will be listed for various sort of pre-trial hearings before eventually the trial is listed before a jury. I suspect it will probably be at some point next year.
And Izzy, on Saturday night, when those reports were first emerging, we were told that there was a second man arrested by the police. What do we know about that now?
Again, we know very little. It's not particularly clear what happened here, and the police have been fairly vague. They've said that officers acted in good faith after being told by witnesses at the scene that this other man was involved in the attack. But the other man has since been released after police ruled out his involvement. It's not particularly clear what happened, but initially when the police came out and said 2 suspects, that sort of added to the gravity of this because it suggested something potentially quite coordinated. Terror was ruled out on Sunday morning, but late on Saturday night when they're saying 2 people have been arrested and multiple people have been injured, it did sort of feed into the possibility that this could be something terror related, which the authorities did actually later rule out.
And as far as we know, they're not looking at anybody else.
No, they're not looking for any other suspects. They've said this is contained for now.
And Izzy, just going back to Saturday evening, take us through the events of what unfolded on that train.
So the incident happened on the LNER service from Doncaster to London King's Cross. It left Doncaster about 6:25. The train wasn't packed, but it was quite busy. There had been quite a big football match between Manchester United and Nottingham Forest. So a load of football fans got on at Grantham Station at just after 7 p.m. And then it gets into Peterborough about 7:30, and we now know that this is where the attacker boarded the train. And it was shortly after it left Peterborough that the attack started, and passengers started to be assaulted in coach J, which is near the middle of the train. And as you can imagine, people very quickly dispersed and started running through the train to try and escape the attacker. And that's when other passengers started to realise that something quite serious was going on. One passenger described thinking it was a Halloween prank because, Halloween had been the night before.
Guys suddenly run past going, run. There's a guy stabbing literally everyone, everything. At first, there was a few of us kind of looking at each other like thinking it was a joke, like it's Halloween, like they're pranking. But then you could kind of see in their faces they were being serious. So I kind of got my stuff and I was running, and everyone was really pushing behind us, really panicking.
He described quite powerfully putting his hand on a train seat, and it was just soaked in blood. He realised, actually, no, this is really, really serious.
It's horrific. And Izzy, we have all been trying to piece together what happened on that train from some of the really harrowing eyewitness accounts coming out. Tell us what else you've heard from people about what took place and how they responded.
So because the Sunday Times was able to make contact with a witness fairly early on into the breaking news on Saturday, we were told that there was almost a bit of a stampede, that people were sort of trampling on each other to try and get away from the attacker. We were also told by a witness that they had locked themselves in the toilet alongside other passengers to try and escape the attack. And it's since come to light that people were hiding in sort of like the cafe area of the train. And amongst all the sort of terrifying details that have come out, there have been some real acts of bravery that have come to light.
There was a girl, bless her, who was really, really in a bit of state because the guy had actually tried to stab her, and one of the older guys was an absolute hero, blocked it with his head, and he's got this like gash, he had this gash on his head.
So immediately I just gestured towards the door and just shouted to everyone, run out the station, please exit, leave.
Passengers sort of trying to arm themselves with whatever they could, someone with a glass bottle of Jack Daniels.
There's a person that I know, and he's kind of looked at me and gone like, have you got anything we can use in case he comes through? And he didn't. Well, we had a Jack Daniels bottle between us and that was it. So we're kind of sitting there with one Jack Daniels bottle, just looking down the end of this carriage, just praying somebody doesn't walk down with a knife, with a gun.
Gosh.
And then, of course, there were the train members of staff who the Transport Secretary has come out and said undoubtedly saved lives.
Tell us about that, because we know that the staff on the train were crucial to preventing this from being an even worse incident. What do we know about what they did?
So an LNER staff member is said to have thrown food and bottles at the attacker to try and fend him off, but unfortunately was attacked in the process. And this staff member remains in a critical condition in hospital.
His actions undoubtedly saved lives. He went to work on Saturday morning to do his job and he left work a hero. I know that the British Transport Police have reviewed CCTV footage from what happened on the train, and he literally put himself in harm's way. And so there will be people who are alive today because of his actions.
There was also the train driver, Andrew Johnson, who reacted very quickly and pulled the train into Huntingdon station. Now, this is the fast train that goes into London King's Cross. It only stops at major hubs like Peterborough and London and Doncaster. So it wasn't due to stop at Huntingdon at all. That was the actions of the train driver, Johnson, who thought on his feet, thought very quickly, and he pulled into the station, enabling passengers to get off the train and escape the attack, but most importantly, allowing the police to come to the scene and assist and help.
And what do we know about the train driver?
So Andrew Johnson is a former Royal Navy Chief Petty Officer, so he's clearly a man who's very used to making decisions under pressure. He was deployed to Iraq in the Second Gulf War.
A really helpful person to have on hand at a time like that.
Definitely.
When the train pulls into Huntingdon, and we should say this is sort of so lucky that he thought of stopping there rather than waiting till he got to London, but it's doubly lucky because of the facilities available at Huntingdon. Talk us through that.
So Huntingdon is very close to the local police station. So as a result of that, officers from Cambridgeshire Constabulary and the British Transport Police were dispatched to the scene and were able to arrive extremely quickly. So the train pulled in at about 7:45, and there were photos posted on social media of armed officers running along the platform. They'd obviously arrived very quickly.
Huntingdon was also a fortunate place to stop because it has a hospital. Tell us, what do we know about the people who were injured? How many are still in hospital, and what do we know about their condition? We're talking on Monday afternoon. As things stand, how are they?
So on Saturday evening, 10 people were taken to hospital from the scene. They were all quite badly injured. We now know 5 of those victims have been discharged. On top of the 10, 1 self-presented later at hospital, so there were 11 in total with injuries. And one of those that remains in hospital is the LNER staff member, who is unfortunately still in a critical condition.
The attack on the LNER train service on Saturday night has sent shockwaves across the country and also across Westminster. Theo Usherwood is politics reporter for Times Radio. Theo, we're talking to you on Monday afternoon, and Cambridgeshire Police have just released a statement which is bound to raise even more questions. Tell us what it says.
Cambridgeshire Police have now referred themselves to the independent police watchdog, the IOPC, following revelations that there were other incidents in Peterborough. Firstly, on Friday evening, a man was seen with a knife at a barber's shop in Fletton in Peterborough just before 7:30, but that incident wasn't reported to them until around 9:10 on Friday evening. There was a second incident at a barber's. Again, this was reported to the police around 9:25 by the barbers in Fletton whilst the man was at the scene, but by the time officers got there, they were unable to find the individual. And then there was an incident on Friday evening, and police are now investigating whether this third incident, in which a 14-year-old was stabbed by a man, whether that is linked to the train attacks. This happened at about 7:10 on Friday, and the victim was taken to Peterborough City Hospital and later discharged.
I suppose what it does do is just sort of raise questions about that 24 hours. So between Friday evening and Saturday morning, there are this spate of incidents around Peterborough which are now being investigated to see if they're connected to the attack on the train. Theo, it's been really interesting watching the police's role in this. Very quickly after the attack, they released details about the 2 men at the time who they had arrested and also their ethnicity. Tell us about that. I mean, just to clarify, one of those, as we've already explained, has been released and there are no more questions to be asked about him. But tell us about why the police felt they had to talk about the ethnicity so quickly.
So this goes back to what happened in Southport and the Southport murders at that Taylor Swift dance hall event. In the wake of that, both the police and the prosecutors were very cautious about releasing any details about the background or ethnicity of the alleged perpetrator. And that led to the widespread misinformation being circulated online. And that spread of misinformation led to unrest, not just online, but in real life. And so the standard practice now for the police and prosecutors is that once they have determined the background of the suspect in any given case, is to release that particular aspect of their details as quickly as possible. In this case, the police were very upfront in saying that he was a British national, a black British national, and now Shabana Mahmood in the House of Commons has confirmed that he was born in this country. So this is a new approach that's being taken in the hope that by being clear and upfront, it is perfectly possible on the one hand not to jeopardise the fairness of the British justice system and at the same time ensure that there is not misinformation which then leads to unrest, whether it be protests or demonstrations.
Yeah, it was interesting also to see that early on we were told the police had declared this a Plato incident, which is a code word for it being a terrorist attack, and then very quickly made it public that it wasn't. So it does seem like that guidance is working. You mentioned that the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has been addressing the Commons. Just tell us what she said.
Well, it's interesting. She's just given MPs an update. It's the first opportunity the government has had to speak since, of course, the terrible events on Saturday night, outlining exactly what happened and the response.
I am sure I speak for everyone in this House when I say that my thoughts today are first and foremost with the victims, with their family and their friends, and all those who experienced this terrifying attack. I know this House and the public will have many unanswered questions today about who this attacker was and about the events that led up to the attack. Those questions will be answered, but it will take time. The police and prosecutors must be allowed to do their work.
In this case, as far as we know from the authorities so far, there is no suggestion of terrorism. This will be subject to a criminal proceedings, but at the moment the authorities are saying there is no suggestion that this was terrorism related. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, also said that the government will look at measures to better protect the public following what happened in Huntingdon. There had been speculation that the government might introduce airport-style security or arches which people would have to walk under before they board trains or go into train stations to ensure that they're not carrying a bladed weapon. Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, said this morning that she thought that this would make the job of the British public in terms of going about their business and going to work just too difficult.
We need to think about the convenience to passengers in stations. We obviously have to put appropriate security in place, and that's why we will be improving the CCTV in stations. But at the moment, that type of airport scanning technology, I don't think is the right solution for stations in the UK.
The government isn't minded in that way.
Yeah.
But interestingly, Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, has raised the possibility that there is actually now technology available to the authorities.
There is work underway at the Home Office, which I know about, to develop technology to scan for knives at a distance, which it is hoped can distinguish knives from keys or mobile phones. And this, of course, could help police rapidly identify those carrying a knife in a public place.
So it's clear that there are calls from the Conservatives that actually the government does need to be looking at the very latest technology in order to keep the British public safe. And to that end, the Home Secretary has told the House of Commons that the government will, once the facts of this case are known, be willing to look at what can be done to ensure that the railways remain a safe place.
So there may be more measures being rolled out soon. So there's a real need at the moment for politicians to be very careful about what they say so that they don't get in the way of the legal process around this. Has everyone been quite so responsible? What sort of response has there been across the House to this incident?
But I think everybody, just from listening in the House of Commons this afternoon, everybody's mindful of that warning so far from Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons.
I will therefore urge members to avoid speculating about the guilt or innocence of an individual or the motive for the attacks. Members may wish to ask about the emergency services, the response to the attacks, the support to victims and families, and connected matters. But I urge the utmost caution in avoiding any remarks that might prejudice a future trial.
But I think what's more broadly developing is this idea, and this is on the right of British politics, this idea that Britain is broken. The narrative that's developing on the right of British politics is that the government doesn't have a grip on keeping the British people safe at the moment, and that there is something fundamentally wrong with society, with British society. And it was interesting that listening to Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, her interview from yesterday, where she was actually quite measured in criticism of Labour, of the Labour government, but she was very clear that a lot of people, in her view, were asking the question now, is Britain broken? Can it be fixed? Or are we going to see further attacks like the one we saw in Huntingdon being perpetrated? Because whilst the numbers for knife crime are actually coming down slightly, it is very difficult for the government to stop anybody intent on causing significant harm from being able to get hold of a large bladed weapon, whether it be a zombie knife, a large kitchen knife, and perpetrating the most violent and horrendous acts of violence.
This incident will have shaken the whole country, I think. You know, the horror of what happened and what the people who were there went through, but also just the fact that it could have been any one of us. It's a normal train. There was nothing to indicate that something would go wrong here. Most people will feel very shaken by this incident. But that narrative of broken Britain, and we've heard it all through the summer now, you know, there was sort of the Reform Crime Week. We've heard a lot about everything that's going wrong. How real is it? I mean, if you look at the data, does it stack up?
But if you look at the data, I saw something incredibly interesting posted on Fraser Nelson's Twitter feed, which was statistics of the murder rate in London, which shows that it's been declining to its lowest level now in many years. And of course, London has often been a sort of bête noire for those on the right, as being a city besieged with gang crime and knife crime and violent murders. And indeed, that feeds into the narrative that has developed between, or the argument, the row that's developed between Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, and the US President Donald Trump. But actually, as I say, if you look at the numbers, they have dropped off significantly. There is obviously, and there continues to be, an issue when it comes to crossings in the English Channel. We saw, of course, a number of high-profile cases over the summer when there was the incident of the migrant at the Epping Hotel who sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl, and then only a couple of weeks ago was released mistakenly from prison rather than being deported or sent to a detention centre. So the government finds itself certainly in a PR battle to convince voters that they have got a handle, particularly on the issue of immigration and law and order, at a time when financially there are going to be some very difficult decisions for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in the budget. And I think there's the danger for Keir Starmer and his government is that this sort of creeps into the psyche of British voters, that they not only feel worse off, but now they no longer feel safe. And I think that's quite a perilous position that I think the country can find itself in, even if the numbers, the statistics that underpin all of this don't necessarily bear it out.
That was Theo Usherwood, politics reporter at Times Radio. And before that, Izzy Lyons, news reporter at the Sunday Times. The producers today were Michaela Arneson and Shabnam Gurrawal, with help from Alula Hart. The executive producer was Kate Lamble, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you'd like to get in touch with us, do drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.